we're recording.
All right. This week we're talking about the legend and lore of Frank Zappa.
Yes, we are.
There is much to talk about.
Yeah. We're a little intimidated. We're gonna try to keep our cool, but we gotta make sure we do it right.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to cover. So this week we're gonna cover studio records. Next week we're gonna cover live records. Possibly the week after, if we decide we still want to do more, we might do posthumous and rare records.
We gotta fit symphonic stuff in there somewhere too.
Yeah.
That might be next week.
So
yeah,
I'm going to start with Freak Out, because that's the obvious place to start at the beginning. And I wanted to lay out sort of the context for what was going on. Freak Out came out in 1966, and other notable albums that came out in 66 were Blonde on Blonde by Dylan, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. The Beatles actually released Revolver and Rubber Soul. The Monkees, self-titled, came out in 66, and one of the top records, the number one records in 66, was Herb Alpert. If you can believe that.
That's crazy.
Whipped Cream. Remember that album, Whipped Cream?
No, I don't know that album, but
it was terrible. It was god awful. But that, just to give you an idea, where the intellect of the general public was.
Right.
I mean, there was a lot of great stuff, and it was a revolutionary period. So Frank Zappa takes the bar band called the Soul Giants and somehow gets them in the studio with MGM Verve. Tom Wilson was one of their main A&R guys, and he thought that he was basically taking a white blues R&B band into the studio. So it became painfully apparent after like the first 10 minutes that, that wasn't what was happening.
Right.
So he was the money guy. Basically, he was the guy that the record company set up to babysit the mothers and make sure everything got done. Okay. So Frank actually talked about seeing him on the phone talking to the guys in New York, saying, guess what? These guys aren't a blues band, but I think they're cool. So I think we should put some money behind this. So to give you an idea, I think most records that came out that year, probably not Pet Sounds and maybe not even the Beatles stuff, but the average stuff, they were putting like $6,000 to $8,000 behind. Frank somehow talked them into putting like $21,000 into the Freak Out project.
That's amazing.
Which was an insane amount of money for that time. So here's what we're talking about.
Yeah. I think it was the first double LP, right?
Yeah, it was the first double LP, and it was one of the first concept records too.
Crazy.
So this is the stereo version. It's got the little quote from Frank on the back here about the mothers. This is a first pressing on the Verve, the blue label Verve. And again, they were owned by MGM, so that was all like record or film money, film industry money. And here's the way to really hear this. This is the mono version. And the mixes are quite a bit different. That also came out on a blue label. So if you can find it, I would probably recommend looking into the mono version. And a lot of this stuff came out after Frank died. There was like a couple of early takes that got bumped off of the record that came out on, trying to think what that was called. There was a bunch of sort of outtake collections that came out much later, and so
Yeah,
you
I've
can
heard some
hear
of those.
some of that stuff. But I mean, there's some real standout tracks on this record. I mean,
Like all
Return
of them.
of Son of Monster Magnet, of course, you know, which was originally called Cream Cheese. That's kind of the masterpiece. My favorite is Help, I'm a Rock.
That's a great
Yeah,
one.
that's such a great cut.
And for the listeners at home who don't know it, you've basically heard the whole track with him saying the title. It's
Yeah,
basically them just going, "Help, I'm a rock."
yeah. And yeah, Who Are the Brain Police? Another sort of very famous track. Motherly Love, Wowie Zowie.
That one's a great one.
Yeah. So, I mean, listening to this record is a lifetime endeavor. I mean, you're not going to understand this by listening to it 2 or 3 times.
Right.
I've probably listened to it 100 times, and I still have no idea what most of it's about.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the point of
Right.
a lot of this stuff, of the Frank Zappa stuff.
And well, what he was doing a lot with his early stuff with the Mothers was parroting like a lot of like doo-wop groups and the kind of, you know, the songs about hanging out at the ice cream shop and things like that. And the thing was, he was really well versed in those styles. So when he parodies them, it really works, but it's also like it's hilarious.
Yeah, and there was a lot of sound collage kind of stuff
That
going on
that
in
too,
the
yeah.
early Mother stuff where, you know, it would be like a song and then a story and then a song and a story. I guess I tried to think of like how you would actually label the style of music, and the best thing I could come up with was psychedelic lounge music
Yeah, I mean that works.
with a lot of satire
Right.
mixed in.
Yeah.
Because it's not just music. There's, you know, satire and stories and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're new to Frank Zappa, you know, it's probably worth starting at the beginning and try to at least get through Freak Out a few times.
Yeah.
And of course, the lineup of the Mothers changed over the first few records, but basically this was the Soul Giants with Frank Zappa doing all the writing. He basically took over the band.
Right.
So,
Oh, I think because he joined them later. He was a later member and then kind of, I think.
yeah, actually their first guitarist quit and Frank stepped in, and they thought he was just going to play guitar, and he ended up kind of taking over the band.
Yeah.
Kind of convincing everybody that they should be doing original music, and he just happened to have a lot of original music.
Yeah.
So
I have a couple more things to say about this record. First of all, the name. I think it's important to mention the etymology of the name Mothers of Invention, because originally they just wanted to be called, you know, as we've been referring to them, the Mothers, because especially in the jazz world, but just in the music world in general, someone who could play their instrument really well was called a mother.
yeah,
And so, but the label was like, we can't put out a band called the Mothers, so they put themselves as the Mothers of Invention. And secondly, this record is really cool because he basically almost like an autobiographical kind of thing going on in here. Or actually, no, he does have biographical stuff. And also a bunch of like relevant quotes from Perez and some disc jockey and a very important man at Columbia Records. And he's got a list of about, I think, 100 people that he considers his influences, both good and bad. So he's got like politicians he really hates, musicians he really loves. So it's pretty great.
Going back to Tom Wilson, the money man behind the project, the legend and or lore behind what happened with him is once he phoned the the head guys down in New York and let them know what they were in for, and that they weren't recording a white blues / R&B band. He proceeded to drop acid.
Oh, while they were recording.
Was tripping for the rest of the recording session. I mean, this album was recorded in 3 days, if you can believe that.
Wow.
There was a couple of tracks that were started before these sessions, but the vast majority, 90% of it, was recorded in 3 days.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So the other thing to probably understand is Verve was predominantly a jazz and folk label. So there was nothing on Verve that even vaguely came close to the Mothers.
Right.
And years later, after Frank moved on, you know, it was painfully apparent that they were completely out of their element. I mean, the album only sold like 40,000 copies when it came out, which for an album that cost $21,000 to produce, they took a huge bath.
Yeah.
So obviously, over the course of decades, it sold lots and lots of copies, and it was actually nominated for a Hall of Fame Grammy years later, and was listed on most of the top album lists of the 60s, and, you know, actually album lists of all time.
Yeah.
I think Rolling Stone did a 500 greatest albums of all time, and it was on that list.
Yeah.
So I mean, it got its day.
Yeah, for sure.
People studied it, and over the course of time, it became accepted to be the masterpiece that it obviously was. So
yeah.
So you got something next, or you want me to jump in with the next?
Probably let's just go in chronological order, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, also released in 1966, in the same year, Absolutely Free. So this is the second Mothers record. Here's the inside. And then it's got the little map thing on the back. So I've actually got two versions of this. This is the US, the blue Verve label. And then I've got a UK version. Or no, actually this is US as well. I just have two US copies for some reason. So this was equally as bizarre as Freak Out.
It's almost like a third, or like a sixth or fifth and sixth side to Freak Out, almost.
Yeah, it's more of the same. After the record company figured out that they probably weren't going to sell millions of copies of these, they put the kibosh on the budget, and I think they gave them like a $11,000 budget or something like that for this. So it was a little more contained than the Freak Out sessions, but equally as weird.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's lots of interesting satire in here. As far as tracks, Plastic People probably is one of my favorites. America Drinks, Uncle Bernie's Farm, Son of Susie Cream Cheese. You know, with I believe Susie Cream Cheese makes an appearance on vocals on here. So
right.
So all released in the same year as Freak Out, 1966.
Wow. Yeah, well, there's a lot of that for anyone who's listening who's kind of new to Frank Zappa. I think he released 60 albums in his lifetime, and I think he
Well,
died.
those were the straight up albums.
Right, just like
And
no,
posthumous,
yeah,
posthumous albums. There was many more.
probably
There
even
was
like
over
20 more.
100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his he was incredibly prolific, and pretty much all of it is good. So there's a lot. He maybe put out like 2 or 3 albums a year, and we'll talk about maybe later. We'll talk about there was a time basically he turned in 5 albums at once to get out of a record contract.
Yeah, well, he was also doing film, and he was also a pioneer in animation,
Right.
and was doing a lot of other stuff while he was recording these records.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most interesting part about it is he was doing a lot of stuff on a lot of different fronts,
Mm-hmm.
all at the same time.
Yeah.
So next, and I'm going to do them in the order that they came out. So we're only in it for the money. Technically, was recorded at the same time as Lumpy Gravy, and that was slated to be released before Lumpy Gravy, but it actually came out in '68. This came out in '67. Another classic Frank album cover. It's got the Pipco t-shirt on. So this also came out on Verve. Also, see, what I've got here, this is actually a British version, and that came out on the Black Verve British label. So yeah, Lumpy Gravy was recorded with a symphony orchestra. So there's orchestra segments, and it says with chorus. So I don't think it was a real chorus. It was just people that he gathered together. Equally as weird as the first two.
I haven't heard that one.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's some crazy stuff. Probably got into more of the satire and the sort of storytelling, spoken word stuff, but you know, basically a sound collage with a lot of different styles. So that was the third release, and then after that, in early '68, we're only in it for the money.
That's a different cover than what I've got.
Well, it was originally supposed to be released.
There we go.
This,
yeah,
on the cover. Okay, but the first pressings, I believe, were released with this on the cover.
Right.
And the reason why, he had talked to Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
About doing, you know, the spoof on the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. And McCartney basically referred him to his business management and never got back to him. So they ended up putting it on the inside. Yeah, how
That's
crazy
so brilliant.
is that?
Yeah.
And not only did they spoof the Sgt. Pepper record cover, but they also spoofed the insert. Here's the insert, Frank's version.
It's got the mustache. Is that a boob?
It's a boob, yeah. A dollar bill. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So yeah, this was Frank's reaction to Sgt. Pepper.
Well, and also just the hippies and the flower power thing in general.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about you, but I think this is probably the least accessible of all the early Mother stuff. It's pretty weird.
Yeah.
And it's hard to listen to for me. It's brilliant, like
Yeah.
all of it, but you know, it's complex and hard to consume.
Yeah. Some of the, let's see, I like Who Needs the Peace Corps is really good. Flower Punk I think is pretty, like Flower Punk is kind of the uh the one for me that's the most memorable. It's kind of like a Hey Joe kind of blues, but it's in, I think it's in 7, and it's like sped up, and he's talking about how he's gonna go, I don't know, grow his hair out and smoke dope and sleep on someone's couch or something like that. What else has he got on here? What's the ugliest part of your body? That's pretty good. It's like
Mother People. Don't forget about Mother People.
Mother People. I don't know if I remember that one. Yeah, that's a cool album. I like it.
Yeah, actually, Eric Clapton makes a spoken word appearance on here, if you can believe that. Yeah, and actually, the Mothers were kind of known for doing a lot of guests on their records. Freak Out actually had Dr. John and Paul Butterfield.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. So working our way to the next, just when people thought they had the whole Mothers thing figured out, then they release a doo-wop record. So Cruising with Ruben and the Jets is basically Frank's version of a very twisted doo-wop record. And this is a UK version. It's got the shiny cover.
I think there's like an explanation somewhere on the cover about like why they put that album out under that name or something.
Well, there's a little thing.
I got my.
Is this the Mothers of Invention recording under a different name in the last ditch attempt to get their cruddy music on the radio? I mean, that's what the guy is saying who's holding the guitar, which I guess we can assume is Frank with the big nose.
Yeah.
So this is the UK Black Verve pressing. This is the US version on the Blue Verve label. So I really like the doo-wop stuff, actually.
He does it really well.
I'm a doo-wop fan generally, and he does do it well. And there's little snippets of it that sort of appear in all the other Mothers stuff too.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of a weird style because it was like really prevalent and then it just kind of dropped off the face of the earth.
It was part of his childhood.
Right.
I mean, that was a big part of what was going on, you know, when Frank was probably in high school, I would think.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's a million doo-wop bands. They were all good in their own way, you know, but great harmonies. And of course, those harmonies carried over into the later period Frank Zappa stuff when he got Flo and Eddie in the Mothers, who were basically the Turtles.
Right.
They were known for having the best harmonies around.
Yeah.
Happy together, you know. So you got anything else to show? Or?
I got well, am I premature? I don't know the chronological. Would Weasels Rip My Flesh? Is that kind of the next big step?
That's the 10th album.
Okay.
So we're skipping, that was number 5. So then next would be Mother Mania, Uncle Meat, Hot Rats, Burton
Oh, we
Queenie
got to talk about.
Sandwich.
Okay, hold on. Let's back up and talk about Hot Rats for a second.
Got to talk about Hot Rats. You got it, or do I have to show
I
it?
got it, but I got it on CD.
Garrett, didn't we talk about this?
I know. I have a problem.
All right, I have to go get it.
Okay.
Talk about.
I'll talk about it. I'm gonna hold up the CD, but I'm gonna hold it really close so it looks like a record. All right. So this is Hot Rats, and this is the first record that he made. I think just under his name. And I've heard it referred to as the Frank Zappa record for people who don't like Frank Zappa. There's really like none of his. There's not a lot, really, any satire, so it's a pretty straightforward record, except for the song "Willie the Pimp," which is the only track with vocals on it, which has the legendary Captain Beefheart on it, who he produced, which we may talk about. We got to talk about Captain Beefheart at some point. But it's basically it's kind of a fusion record. I'm trying to remember some of the musicians on here. I think Jean-Luc Ponty is on here.
It's also probably the first record where Frank went out of his way to showcase his playing.
Right.
As a guitarist, I mean, it is a fusion record, and some great guitar work.
Yeah, so really, especially on Willie the Pimp is really great. And this is kind of the only record. This is kind of a music nerd sort of trivia thing, but I think this is probably the only record where he plays over chord changes. I think kind of after that he kind of stick to like 1 or 2 chord vamps, but on like trying to remember what tunes. I think Son of Mr. Green Jeans, there's like chord changes and stuff, and he kind of sort of plays over them. But yeah, this is a really fun record, and kind of a.
This is on the Bizarre label. This pressing.
Oh, nice.
So if we're going to talk about Hot Rats, we got to basically talk about Hot Rats Part 2.
Right.
Which is Waka Jawaka.
Is it Waka Jawaka or Waka Jawaka?
I thought it was Waka Jawaka, but it's very similar. And if you notice down here, Hot Rats.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also a lot of great guitar work, and I guess you could consider this a fusion record as well.
Yeah. This one for me isn't quite as like focused sounding. But I think that was probably the intention, but it's a little bit more jam kind of oriented. But I like the melody of Big Swifty. There's like the written out parts are really, really fantastic. And then we'll talk about maybe the album that came after this, but I think we're skipping ahead a little bit with this. We should maybe backtrack to what else is there? Do you have anything else?
Well, there's Burned Weenie Sandwich, Weasels.
Yeah.
You got that one?
I got Weasels, yeah.
Yeah.
This is a cool record.
This
is kind of maybe in between. First of all, just get a nice, good look at this. This is a great record.
You know, when I was a kid, I used to go with my mom every Saturday to a place called Treasure Island to buy groceries. And they had a great record section, you know? Mm-hmm. So we'd get there and she'd go buy groceries and I'd head for the record section. I'd stand there and read record covers for an hour and a half. And I remember standing in the store looking at this, holding this record, trying to figure out what the hell was going on with this guy. I mean, I had sort of heard a little bits of some of the other Frank Zappa records, but I remember seeing that cover and I was just blown away by it. I just stood there and looked at it for like a half hour.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think it's a really great example of his kind of the way he would kind of parody the culture at the time, which is like, you know, some really suave looking white dude shaving his face on a billboard or something, but he's got a
with a weasel.
It's got a weasel ripping his face open. This is a cool record. It's kind of sort of in between the early Mother stuff and the later more jazz fusion sort of stuff. Let me think. But even like it's kind of got a little bit of everything. Like Directly from My Heart to You is just kind of a straight ahead blues track with Don Sugarcane Harris, and Toads of Short Forest is kind of more of a fusion thing. Prelude to the Afternoon of a Sexually Aroused Gas Mask, as I think like mostly vocals like laughing. And then he's got My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama, which is kind of just like a really heavy blues
classic.
Yeah, it's like one of his really all-time great kind of classic bar songs. So this is a really good album. Yeah, I don't know. It's a great album.
So I guess we gotta talk about this period.
Wait, we're skipping.
We're skipping?
Yeah, because there's an important moment in Zappa's life right around the time of a little bit after Weasels, where an audience member pushed him off the stage and into the orchestra pit. I think it was like the boyfriend of one of his fans or something like that. And he was stuck in a wheelchair. And he also, like, I think broke his windpipe. And so all the records after that, his voice has his more iconic low kind of sound after it healed. But there was a period around like Waka Jawaka where he was mostly writing. And this is one of my favorite. This is probably the first Frank Zappa album I listened to, which is the Grand Wazoo. And it's like a big band record. You can see he's got Uncle Meat, the record label over there. And it's kind of a musical or an instrumental concept record about some battle between a bunch of bands. You can sort of see him here. And this is kind of the beginning of some of his more consistent musicians from the later period. I think he's got like George Duke and Erroneous, and yeah, I guess those are the two ones who were on a lot of other records. But some really great horn arrangements and really just like beautiful music. Grand Wazoo is like really fun and kind of funky, and Eat That Question is also just like a really good jam. But Blessed Relief is like just a gorgeous kind of like 6/8 ballad. So this is, I really like have a lot of love for this record. This was kind of my real introduction to Frank. All right, now let's get on to the mid 70s or early mid 70s stuff. There we go.
Don't Eat the Yellow Snow.
Actually, that was
Everybody
my first.
knows this record. I mean, this is probably the most commercial Frank Zappa record. Cosmic Debris, Apostrophe, Stinkfoot.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this stuff actually got airplay.
Yeah,
at least definitely. I remember hearing it on 70s sort of album rock stations.
And it's commercial, but it doesn't feel really like it's sacrificing anything. I think it's just more. It's not as weird. I mean, it's definitely weird, but it's not as like balls to the wall weird as like Who Are the Brain Police. But it's
killer band too.
Yeah, unbelievable.
I mean, Jim Gordon is on here, Jack Bruce is on here, George Duke.
Yeah.
Ray Collins comes back. I mean, he was gone for a while out of the Mothers. Kind of was in and out of the Mothers, let's say. Yeah, just these are all people who were on the record.
Yeah.
Amazing lineup.
Yeah.
So in that same period, I guess I would kind of group all three of these together. Overnite, Sensation.
That's actually from the same session. He recorded those both at the same time.
Has the famous Camarillo Brillo, which is another one that actually got airplay. I'm the Slime.
Yeah. Or not, I'm thinking of no, I'm not thinking of Camarillo Brillo. What's the one that's like really, really dirty?
Well, there's Montana on here. Dynamo Hum.
Dynamo Hum. That's the one that one's pretty explicit.
Dirty Love,
Yeah.
Zombie Woof.
Yeah. And these records are kind of different, a departure in that they're maybe like they're a little tighter, they're a little more funky, rock oriented, but they're also very high on virtuosity. So there's a lot of like really fast unison passages, and some like ripping Zappa solos and some ripping George Duke solos.
Yeah, and this is when Ruth Underwood comes into the band.
Yeah. She's
Jean-Luc Ponty is on this.
Yeah.
So another classic. And then from that same sort of period, One Size Fits All.
Yeah.
Not quite as commercial.
That one's got kind of probably one of his more revered compositions, which is Inca Roads, which is I think about like in the Andes they have those, I don't even know what they are, but we look at them and we don't know what they were built for, and so they're kind of maybe assuming that they were like supposed to be landing strips for aliens. And it's like an 8-minute piece. It's got a great guitar solo on it, and some also really goofy. Did a booger bear come from somewhere out there just to land in the Andes? Was it round and did it have a motor, or was it something different? Kind of stuff. That was also for me one of the first records that really kind of blew my mind about his music. Oh, and it's got Johnny Guitar Watson on the last track.
Yeah, right. And then the other guy on here that I really like is Napoleon Murphy Brock.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a great vocalist.
Great vocalist,
you know?
Yeah.
This might have been one of his better bands.
Yeah.
It's actually the band that was on Roxy and Elsewhere.
Right. Which we will be getting to probably next week. So stay tuned. I mean, we've already talked about it, but we'll maybe go into more depth about the history and stuff.
Yeah, so next week we're going to try to cover some live stuff, and there's lots and lots to cover. So,
yeah.
I mean, we kind of made an attempt at touching
yeah.
his studio repertoire, you know, but there's lots more.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to do a really extensive thing here. We're just basically trying to talk about stuff we like. And I really love his live stuff, and I've got some rarer live stuff I'm going to show next week as well. So we'll get into that. So I think we kind of covered the studio stuff, huh?
Yeah, I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone who tuned in. Hopefully we've inspired you to go out and check out some Zappa if you haven't already. Some people.
Yeah. Everybody's spending more time at home these days, so it's a great time to check out some Frank Zappa stuff.
Yeah. And Ken, what do they do if they don't have any Frank Zappa records?
They go to Paramount Record Shop at 402 East Main Street, open on Fridays and Saturdays. And actually, we just got a really killer collection in this week, so we've got a lot of really nice Zappa stuff. So this would be a great week to come in.
Yep. All right.
Check it out. All right. See you next week.
Yep. See y'all next week.